Okay. Before we go into Milo, I'll take a a super chat. Cool T Poex. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. For 5, Richard, I think for the alt-right, it is important to have a powerful political movement in getting our message across. But also, I think we need to have a revamped grassroots cultural movement from the ground up for the positive future. What's your take? Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think really anyone would disagree with that. I think that I think it is important that we try to that we try to have some kind of bridge to a grassroots movement that is not going to be full on Spencerian ethno-state, my stuff, which is pretty heady and kind of, it's going to go over the head of a lot of people. It might turn off a lot of people. I get it. I've always got it. I'm trying to be a political leader, but I'm at heart, I'm a intellectual, and we have to find some kind of bridge where we can resonate with them. And the conservative movement intellectuals, such as they are, do have that bridge where a conservative movement intellectual could not counter signal the Tea Party, say, which is at least in its beginning, was a kind of grassroots, not that articulate kind of white angst movement. And we need that kind of thing too. We would be better if we have that. And I think very often we feel isolated, and we feel like we don't have that. We don't have that grassroots base movement. We don't have a bunch of guys that we can count on, and that's certainly how I felt. I felt actually over this past year, I felt quite isolated by not having losing those connections, due to the fact that, post Charlottesville, for all these reasons, the media intensity was just so hot. But everything changes, and I think that nothing is written in stone. I think that there is certainly a possibility for us to find that. We just have to have the right people. We have to have the right people leading youth activist groups.
Yes, yeah, and clearly Milo is not one of them. He's never going to be able to be compatible with the alt-right ever again. I mean, obviously there was some value to him at the beginning. He was, I guess, he was useful in terms of bashing the radical feminists and the SJWs and everything. And I guess he had this kind of like overnight success. He rose to stardom like really quickly.
It was amazing.
And I thought, okay, you know what? He's basically 1 or 2 steps away. And again, this is in hindsight, because I got to admit, when Milo was rising, I wasn't quite yet alt-right or an identitarian. But as I look back and view his progress, I can see how he was very close to becoming an identitarian. He just got terrified, in my opinion, of what he would lose. And then, of course, he cannot go against the Zionist narrative. Obviously, no. Milo is Jewish, and I find that any Jewish conservative or any Jew on the right is by nature a Zionist. And if they're on the left,
he's even kind of, even his Jewishness is almost suspect or something. Like Milo, who is Milo? Like we asked that serious question about Faith Goldy, and it's kind of like, who is Faith Goldy? It's like, which one is it, Faith? Are you identitarian, but maybe not, full on or whatever? Okay, that's fine. Are you a conservative who did a thought experiment with the alt-right? Like, which is it? Who are you? And I think with Milo, even the Jewishness is kind of suspect. Like, it's weird. He's this just British Greek Jew who married a black man, apparently, but then would wear like an iron cross. And I think what we learned from those leaks in the August of 2017 was that his username password, I'll have to look up what it was. It was some, outlandish thing like 1488 forever or something. He's just a bizarre bag of tricks, and I don't know what exactly. So Milo began his career Milo is, I guess, in his early 30s. He's a little bit younger than I am. Or he might be in his mid 30s now. We'll have to look that up. But anyway, yeah, he's kind of a youngish person still. He did a tech blog early on, so we're going back to 2013 and so on. And when I first experienced or encountered Milo, it was when he was going on, say, BBC or something like that, and he was at that point, he was a Gamergate supporter. He was a kind of Breitbart editor. And he was in a very, I have to say, very sophisticated fashion, deconstructing, SJWs and all that kind of stuff. And he didn't wear his homosexuality on his sleeve at that point. For instance, if you saw some of those early interviews, like going back to 2014 with Milo, he wasn't necessarily gay. He was just English.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if you fast forward to, say, 2016 with Trump, he had become Elton John or something. Like it was this really crazy personal transformation that he went through. And yeah. I think this says a lot about him, because I don't know. He's the whole thing is just strange. And he seems to put on a number of different masks and personalities, and then it goes into full on parody. I think Stefan Molyneux in his in one of his videos on Milo, he was saying there's this a second self, and everyone has to quote Hillary Clinton, a private and a public persona. We're a little bit different when you're talking to your mom, or when it's Sunday afternoon and you're hanging out watching Netflix and drinking a beer. You're a different person than you are when you're on this live stream, or when you're giving a speech or engaging in a job interview or whatever. Everyone has a kind of performative self and a private self. That's totally natural. But with Milo, it was like, he took it to the next level, where it was like he was playing this character of Liberace. And it ends up, I remember in 2016, in the spring of 2016, where he was, renting out a mansion in Miami. He had these weird, silicone big tit strippers carrying machine guns. And he had like spray painted photos of the Star of David, and then like LBGT propaganda, and then Trump. It was just insane.
He's like that. He's a living meme. You know that meme where it's got like the swastika in the center and the LGBT rainbow flag and the rebel flag and everything like this just offends everybody. That's essentially what Milo became. It's just something that offended everybody. I think he just thrived off of that. Like, yeah. Here's the thing with Milo. He doesn't have a solid fan base to lean on. He doesn't have this eternal support that is unwavering, that he can always count on. Who identifies with Milo? Who looks at Milo as their leader, the go-to guy for news or any of that? Nobody really.
But they kind of did.
At one point.
At one point he had a rabid fan base. And it was a weird thing. I remember, because I actually know someone who was connected with Milo, and I was criticizing Milo. I was criticizing Milo fairly lightly in 2016, and then by 2017, once we had heard the all that stuff about what was it? I praise my priest because he taught me how to give blowjobs. It just some thing that was just like, please shut up. He was always telling me like, oh, you're insane to criticize Milo. He has all these fans and they could be your fans too, but you shouldn't criticize them. And I was like, no. but anyway.
That was insane when he said that, when he described his sexual experience with the priest as a young boy. And then he put forth the idea, Richard, that perhaps we should keep an open mind because, they're a post pubescent boy. It's different than straight up pedophilia. And okay, whatever. Maybe there is room for that conversation somewhere, like intellectually talking about it, but like he's justified. And yeah, I'm sorry, Milo, but no, this man-child love affair that is absolutely immoral. And both everybody on the left, everybody on the right was completely disgusted with that comment. And he just became entrenched with criticism. He was completely swamped with it coming in from, again, both the left and the right, and he had nowhere to go. And you're right, he did have that very exuberant fan base. They were very confident in Milo, but I think he just became, he turned into a sideshow. He turned into a spectacle. And that's when I started to think, like, what is his core fan base? Like, I'm sorry, Milo, but there just aren't very many homosexual, race mixing, half Jewish people out there for you to kind of lean on as, yeah, you know, I identify with Milo. Like, Richard, there are plenty of you know, Canadians, Americans, Europeans that look at you and they can see you in themselves, right? Both character and what you're doing. And in terms of being a leader, in terms of leading a group of people, you need to kind of embody that. And that's where Milo really falls apart. He's not this news figure like, you know, for instance, InfoWars or anything like that. That's not his play. And in terms of really being a voice for a people, I don't think there's anybody who's like, you know what, Milo is my number one guy. He's
inherently demoralizing because it's like he was interesting as a fish out of water in 2016 in the sense of, look at this gay Greek Jew who's pro-Trump. Oh my gosh, this is hilarious. But at the same time, you know, not that I'm, you know, again, in the context of 2016, I'm not totally against it. Like, for instance, if some gay Greek Jew said, oh, well, you know, actually the alt-right has something, you know, there's a lot of truth to what they say, I would retweet them and be like, oh, look at this. This is interesting. But as a leader and as an embodiment of a movement, there's just something fundamentally demoralizing about that, about not putting forth a white heterosexual male. And again, this is this like game the conservatives are always playing. Just, you know, Ramesh Ponnuru is our great intellectual or whatever. Just this, you know, you don't put forth a white Protestant male. And it's just like, these are the people who should embody conservatism in North America and Europe. And just the Milo thing was like this just turd in the punch bowl from the beginning. And it was kind of funny at the time. Like, you have to understand, I mean, things have progressed and changed even these past few years. I mean, when Milo came on the scene, I thought the whole thing was interesting. And I thought Gamergate was somewhat interesting, even though, as you know, I have zero sympathy for adults playing video games. And when I look at these video games, I'm like, yeah, that probably should be banned. To be honest.
Remember, like, and play your frisbee.
right. Go.
Our boomer.
Throw a frisbee.
Yeah.
The only video game you should play is chess online. That is civilized. But yeah. But anyway, Gamergate, I was a passing spectator to Gamergate because basically it was it became an anti-feminist crusade, although even though it was never able to articulate that, it became we want ethics in journalism or something, which is obviously the limpest thing you can suggest, but it was a reaction against SJWs and feminist, and this attack on what was a kind of man-child culture, which is, playing violent video games, which, I'm not really a fan of. But I think I was actually on with Mike Enoch. I think this is back in 2017. And he actually said this. It was like, it was almost this young men saying, but let me have my false degenerate culture. Let me, you're going to take away even this. Why are you even taking away my false opposition? Which video games are. I mean, you're indulging in a fantasy where you're, conquering countries and shooting people. And, I guess in what is that? Grand Theft Auto raping and murdering hookers and throwing them in the trunk of your car.
Yeah.
All great, good, clean fun.
But for men to live out their fantasies vicariously through characters in games, and I think
right.
it really speaks to how bored and stagnant we are as a society. We have the warrior spirit in us, and we want to be
Right.
there doing great things, living these epic lives, and we're stuck in our homes, we're stuck in our little cages, flicking through TV, and it's just not there. It's not available.
But we should support the alt-right should support banning video games, because the left should actually promote Grand Theft Auto on steroids, because what it does is that it allows young men to live out a parodic version of manhood and basically to do nothing. So all you have to do is sit on your couch and you can go conquer countries, refight the Civil War, and rape and murder hookers, but you actually don't do anything in the real world. So the left should actually support video games. And in fact, they should make them more degenerate and violent, because that will increase the passivity of the young male population. The alt-right should be in favor of banning of all video games. And actually, we should go further, and we should make all video games feminist, extreme feminism. So basically, the video game will be, you have to ask permission to kiss girls, and they just say no all the time. That's like, you keep going up levels and you keep not getting laid. That should be the only video games allowed. And basically, it's just you have heroic versions of purple-haired SJWs conquering Nazis and things like that. So we basically want these video games to turn off as many young men as possible, so that they will turn on to something that's actually real. And I'm actually serious about this. Okay, Chuck Ford has just given us 5. No message attached, but we appreciate the 5. Okay, so let's get back to Milo. I first learned about Milo in 2014 or 2015. And he was, again, he was a kind of conventional conservative to in many ways, but was anti-SJW. He was a good debater. He was quick on his feet. He had facts at his fingertips. He almost looks like he had been trained. And I think at this point he was with Breitbart, so he was being trained and being taught how to talk, in sound bites when you're on cable and things like that. He was being groomed. And when you look back at Milo by 2016, he had become a ridiculous gay freak, and he had, just totally changed his personality. But the thing about Milo was that he was a fish out of water. He was, oh, look, he's gay, he's pro-Trump. But the other thing about Milo is that he wanted to steal the thunder of the alt-right. He viewed the alt-right as a organic, passionate, and powerful force, and he wanted that pop to his persona. And so I remember I think it was spring of 2016, when this was very early on when the alt-right was being talked about in the mainstream media, and Milo wrote or co-wrote, had it ghostwritten, an article called, A Conventional Conservative's Introduction to the Alt-Right. And it was a kind of funny article. It presented us in a palatable manner for conventional conservatives. And even though I thought it was rather inaccurate, I'm not, in a way, totally against it at that time in context, because what we are saying is new. What we are saying is shocking to your average conservative audience. And Milo was slowly, gradually introducing it to them. And when there was this really fascinating leak of material in, I think it was August of 2017, you had Milo and one of his, compatriots, and they were saying, oh, we want to bring them in easy. And then he said, one of his compatriots said, yes, you don't want to go in dry without lube.
Yeah, that's a very Milo-esque thing to say, eh?
Yes. Not funny, but I get your metaphor. And so you could, I think the liberal left and others kind of viewed Milo as he's the alt-right's fellow traveler. He's the alt-right's diplomat. He's dressing, he's dressing up white supremacy as something else. And in a weird way, they weren't completely wrong about that. I think for most of 2016, Milo was a kind of, again, much like Gamergate, he saw a movement that was organic and that was edgy, and he jumped on it. So he has this attraction, which might even come from him being homosexual, to go to where the danger is. Because when something's dangerous, it's cool, it's badass, it is something you can't stop talking about, and so on. And so he went to where the danger is. He jumped on Gamergate. When Gamergate kind of rose and then pittered out, he then jumped on the alt-right as this troll thing. And he presented himself as a troll. So some of these comments he would make about Ben Shapiro, who was his then colleague at Breitbart, were just, they were truly hilarious. You're a 4 foot tall, rabbi, and, just all this ridiculous stuff. And he wanted to get into that troll culture where being as outlandish as possible was the name of the game.
Yeah, that was his goal.
I think that he wanted to take over the alt-right, and I think that Breitbart wanted to take over the alt-right, or excuse me, Bannon wanted to take over the alt-right, and therefore Breitbart. I was fascinated by these leaks that came out. So someone in Milo's circle was in control of his email to the degree that he knew his password, and he revealed that his password was 1488 or something like that. And but he revealed these emails of Bannon where Bannon would say like when Hillary Clinton did her alt-right speech in August of 2017 or 2016 rather, she was basically equating Alex Jones, Steve Bannon, Milo, Richard Spencer. It was like a big tent that she was kind of equating all of us in a somewhat inaccurate way, but it was kind of accurate in the sense that we were all behind Trump. We were all projecting our hopes and dreams on Trump. We saw Trump as a change agent, and we were just all full on the bandwagon. And so she was right about that. And but I think from what I saw from those leaks, Bannon thought that he was referring to her. So he would almost use the first person plural to refer to the alt-right. So he's like, oh, she's she's on her heels. She's attacking us. She doesn't know what the alt-right's capable of. But that kind of Bannon race-blind populism and what I represent and what Milo represent were just all equated in his mind. And I do believe that Milo wanted to take over the alt-right, and I think that Bannon wanted to take over the alt-right.
I think you're right. And I think they viewed us as a force that wasn't powerful enough to be able to compete with their degree of reach and popularity. Like Bannon, Milo, these are, I guess, like household names within the conservative side of things or the right side of things. So I think they believe they could just swallow us up because it was a very loosely defined term, the alt-right. Unfortunately, though, we were sticking to our guns. We were not going to compromise. We're not going to water down what we stood for in any way at all. And I really think they believe that the allure of being able to ride the coattails and be buddies with all of these famous kind of alt-lighters, I think they kind of had the image that that's how it's going to play out. But no, we stuck to our guns. We maintained an identity for ourselves. And this is something that you've always pointed out as something that needs to be of prime importance. Labels and all of that. Okay, yeah, what's in a name? But we need to be able to wave a flag for others to know what it is that we stand for. And there's a lot of old-time white nationalists out there that kind of got away from the whole political scene. They're not necessarily out there on YouTube. And when they see this civic nationalist movement, a Milo or even somebody like Gavin, they're not too attracted to that. So we need to give them something strong, something serious, something that actually speaks to them, so we could move forward as a white nationalist identitarian movement. And I really think the Bannons, the Milos, and all of them thought they could swallow us up. When they realized that no, they're holding true to what they believe in, they're like, okay, we got to get the hell out of here, because now we're going to be associated with them. The media is going to drown us. And so they cucked out. And what did they find? They still couldn't get away from the label of being racist. In fact, it's almost been applied to them more harshly, to a further degree than to the alt-right, specifically because of their reach. As Sargon pointed out to Millennial Woes during their conversation, and maybe we can expand on it. I don't know if you got a chance to watch that, but Sargon basically said, due to our popularity, the overall reach that we have, it kind of makes up for the fact that the alt-right's message is more serious. It's a little bit more of it's more hostile to the globalist agenda. So because we're not quite as popular as they are, we kind of receive the same amount of deplatforming and censorship. So Sargon actually jokingly said to Millennial Woes, but kind of seriously, it's almost more of a danger to you to be talking to me, because you're going to get even more attention because of this, because there's kind of a bigger spotlight on Sargon. I think that's a valid point to make. And I would say that, free speech, censorship, all of that, that's something that the alt-right and the alt-right can come together on. We can say, hey, if we don't put up a front, if we don't do something about this, they're going to pick us all off.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, I certainly would stand side by side with Sargon and say we need free speech on payment platforms and YouTube and so on.
Yeah, but we can call you a cuck. Let us do that.
Yeah, exactly. No, it is interesting because, and I think actually Hailgate was all important in this matter. And I think Hailgate has always been a extremely ambiguous event, and it had many multiple layers to it. Because I mean, I said at the end of my speech, I said, "Hail Trump, hail our people, hail victory." And I certainly knew that was going to be very controversial. It was very provocative. I did not know that it was going to be as controversial as it was, but it was basically and I don't take anything back. I mean, in 2016, I certainly meant the hail Trump thing. I don't mean it now, but it wasn't even like you're my leader. I have unconditional support. I was criticizing Trump in 2016, but it was just kind of like, hail, you did this, hail to the chief, congratulations. And then hail our people, hail victory. I mean, obviously we should hail victory, but victory is everything. But so I did that, and then some people in the audience gave the Roman salute, and it was it was what it was. It was outlandish, it was bad optics, whatever, but it kind of separated everything almost immediately, where the Bannon type said, "Oh no, this is terrible. We're totally against this. We're anti-racist. We have nothing to do with them. We've never met them. They don't exist," kind of thing. And it quickly divided all of those people and from us. And in a way, the alt-right became ours. And then you started to get these like retrospective revisionist narratives about how the alt-right was about libertarian trolls, and then Richard Spencer jumped in and stole the name or whatever, and which was total bullshit. But the fact is, Hailgate was what it was, and there were some bad things about it, which I won't deny, but there were some good things about it. And I have to be frank here. I think it was absolutely essential that the alt-right be associated with me, and that I was able to own it, because the other option was that the alt-right becomes the MILO cult of personality movement, or the alt-right becomes just some vague term for Bannon's populism, where it's like, go vote Republican because you're pissed off, which seems to be the uttermost limit of Bannon's political philosophy. But, I think it was actually essential that the alt-right be defined as identitarianism. And that happened to a large degree because of Hailgate. And I know this might sound like rationalization, but it's not. Like this was actually, to a very large degree, a good thing because it ensured that our movement would be a real identitarian movement. Now, are there some bad things about it? Did we seem unserious? Did we seem like LARPers? Yeah, sure. But in that key area, it was actually important. And I think also that divide would have happened sooner or later because I was not going to back down. I'm not going to A, stop criticizing Trump when I see it, but B, I'm not going to pretend that I don't believe these things. Like, I'm going to be who I am. And so that divide between Bannon and me and Milo and others, it was almost destined to occur. The question only was when and not if.
Yeah, and we needed a leader. We needed somebody who didn't just represent an intellectual component of political activism. We needed somebody to stand up on the stage, get the crowd riled, say, produce, we create, we move upwards. Like hearing you say that again, it was very inspiring. And that image, to have something be, I guess, kind of lurid for people, to hit them on an emotional level, you're not going to win a war, be it political or physical, if you're just simply going at it from an intellectual point of view. I mean, Aristotle wasn't the one to expand the empire. It's Alexander the Great. So you need
Right.
both of those aspects, in my opinion, to be a true leader. And obviously, Alexander the Great learned from the great philosophers. So that's what I kind of want to see happen more in the alt-right, is these old school grassroots kind of movements or whatever, really learning more from the YouTube influencers or people like yourself, so that they can articulate and debate with people and not just seem like, they took our jobs and we got to make our land wide again. Like, we need to present something that's much more easily digested by normies. But at the same time, we have to respect people in different places, like you said before.
Yeah, they took our jibs.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was a kind of long talk. So basically, long story short, and I'll get to some of the super chats. Long story short, throughout 2016, I was out there being a kind of critical defender of Milo. And this is a very interesting thing because I remember Milo did a speech. It might have been in September, it might have been October of 2016, where he basically said how to destroy the alt-right. And this was a fascinating speech because he effectively said to destroy the alt-right is to give them everything they want. And so he did this speech, though he had a PowerPoint. He did it at one of his colleges, and he did, destroy the alt-right, build the wall, and end diversity and feminism. And you'll destroy the alt-right because they won't have anything to grasp at. So it was this kind of interesting, you could say in a weird way, kind of very Jewish, understanding, where it wasn't really even based on like conservative principles, but it was a way of like, let's neutralize these radicals by giving them enough to satisfy them. And let's build the wall, let's end feminism and diversity and so on. And so I found that pretty fascinating, actually. And that he did that. But of course, this caused there was a, fatwa issued by Andrew Anglin of like, we have to destroy Milo. He's the biggest threat. I didn't take part in that because it was kind of like, this guy is he's still giving the alt-right a fair shake. And so there's no real reason to attack him. And I remember there was this Fash the Nation episode in which they had Greg Johnson on, and it was this like 2-hour baiting session of me where it's like, well, Richard said he would destroy Milo if he ever counter signals us. So now everyone needs to denounce Milo. Everyone needs to denounce Milo. And I'm just, it's like, no, I'm not going to fall into this trap. Greg Johnson criticizing Milo for being gay took some chutzpah, let's just put it that way. But anyway, it was just kind of like Milo was in this liminal space and there was no reason to attack him. He was still justifying the alt-right, and all of the attacks on Milo by both conservatives, Jewish conservatives like the Reagan Battalion, and liberals was basically they were attacking Milo for the wrong reasons. They weren't attacking Milo for being a, crazed homo. married to a black man. They were attacking Milo because he gave the alt-right a fair hearing. And I actually wrote an article on this on altright.com, which is, still up, of course, I can't remember what it's titled, but it's on Milo. I think I wrote it in February or March or something of 2017. But it's basically on this fact, like Milo was never really destroyed because of his terrible comments about gays and pederasty. He was ultimately destroyed because he gave a fair hearing to the alt-right. And we should know that. But anyway, after all of those comments about that Milo made, I think everyone else just had to throw up their hands. Like you just can't deal with someone who's that off. And it wasn't a joke. It was, telling one tasteless joke is forgivable, no question. But he wasn't joking when he said, "Oh, I go to these parties in Hollywood where I see young boys being, abused, and this is hilarious." You just don't come back from that, or at the very least, you need to sincerely apologize. But of course, Milo wouldn't apologize, and it just became a shit show. And I was ultimately glad to see Milo go.
Yeah, I think we all are. He was just one of those things where we saw the potential, obviously, in the beginning, but he cucked under pressure. Like, he did this awkward kind of apology about what he said about him and his experience with the priest, and it was very awkward. It was similar to kind of Gavin McInnes, and how it's like, yeah, I'm going to step down, but I wasn't really the leader. And he was like, yeah, I shouldn't have said that. But what I said, there's nothing really wrong with it. That's my personal take. And, it made things worse, in my opinion. If you're going to apologize, you got to apologize 100% and own it, or go against it. Kind of like how Donald Trump, I can criticize Donald Trump in many ways, but I think him and the people around him devised a very good way of saying sorry, like with the Pussygate thing, and then heading things straight on and saying, no, the certain allegations are absolutely outrageous, mocking the left, mocking the fake news. I think that was great. But I see Squatting Slav, actually, he just joined the chat, and he wants to know our take on Tommy Robinson and maybe Lawrence Southern as well. Would you want to get into maybe Tommy Robinson and Lawrence Southern?
Yeah, I mean, he's a character as well. Let's do this. Let's do these in order, just because I don't want to lose touch with them. Oh, his password. So Milo's password was long knives. So it was a reference to the Night of Long Knives. So, it wasn't 1488. It was long knives. Correction noted.